How many of you have seen this? I mean, my slides were generated for engineering before I had a senior talk. So you will see quite a number of engineering terms there, even though this is not engineering symposium, but we share some commonality. So how many of you have seen this scenario before? I think most of us, right? All right. Now, I'm not really interested in the guy freaking out. I'm interested in the bottom part where it says 50-50. And I'll revisit this slide again at the end, and you let me know what this 50-50 means in the context of this picture. All right? So, good morning. It's good to be back in Oman again, and I thank you for your warm hospitality. All right, so my name is Faris. I'm originally from Malaysia, and now working in Qatar University, and I'm happy to be here today to share with you my little experience that I have. Now, before we proceed, let's move forward. Okay. So this is my talk highlight. I'll give you a brief introduction about myself, the education and the grand challenges that we face today, STEM education, what is going on today in terms of outcome-based education, what is learning in general, education, that's the heart of today's topic, which is the constructive alignment. And then we have some fun slides to discuss with you all. And then I'm happy to answer any questions if there are. Now, a little on myself. I've been involved in engineering education for the past 20 years now. It all started back in Malaysia, and Malaysia was quite fast in adopting outcome-based education. And along the process, along the way, I realized that we were just emphasizing mainly on assessment. We forgot the whole idea, the whole philosophy, what is OBE, and how should OBE be implemented. So that led me to write a book, which I just published last year with Taylor and Francis on outcome-based education for engineering practitioners. So basically, that is the heart of today's talk, which is the constructive alignment. So I'm going to squeeze my whole book into just 10 minutes. So please forgive me if I got to do a fast run, but that's the idea of my whole book. Now, what's my main motivation for education research and its transformation? So basically, I believe that at times we lose track of why are we here in a university. We are just at times focusing on content delivery rather than actually how can I transform the students to be actual useful citizens that one day will take the leadership of the country forward. So actually, as educators, we hold this huge responsibility because this generation is going to take over the country in the coming years. So if they are not well equipped, if they're not well trained, how will the country move forward? That is my philosophy. So I believe each university must have its own philosophy. So that is one of my push. How can we create a useful transformation? The other issue I have, some of you may agree with me, some of you may not agree with me, is this. We think with PhD, we can teach. I disagree. You have a PhD, of course, I'm not sure what PhD in education, but if you have a PhD in marine science or in engineering, you are an expert in your field. I cannot contest you in your domain. Dr. Pankaj can be good in food sciences. I cannot contest him in food sciences because that's his area. But are we trained to teach? That's the question. So, if we are not trained to teach, I've spoke to many professors and across the last 20 years, they always adopt teaching practices which they find was useful to them back when they were in the university life. I'm very sure all of you agree with me, right? You may have linked to one or two professors, hey, I like that guy's teaching or her teaching, and you try to implement that in your classroom. But we are not trained to be teachers. So basically, we are moving in the blind. It's a trial and error, and hopefully one day we will strike the right method. But that can take 5, 10, 15 years. So along the line, all those who have graduated, they may not have received proper education. That's why the word teaching and learning comes in. We teach, but are the students learning? So that's where it brought my interest into education. And now I'm doing full-time research in engineering education. So now allow me, I want to share some education and grand challenges. I mean, we are now in the global landscape where we are facing a lot of challenges. For example, climate change, poverty, inequality, economic uncertainty, and recently in this region we have things happening and so on. So, right, energy transition, technology changes are coming in place. So these are all grand challenges that we cannot avoid, and we are actually transversing through these challenges. Then we have challenges in agriculture, marine, and food sectors. Not my area though, right? I just looked up, use ChatGPT, all right, to see if these are true challenges. I believe some are true, some are not true, but I believe you know best. There are challenges within your sector. It can be either in food, agriculture, in marine, and so forth. There are challenges, all right, which is taking place and which we have to be concerned of. Then we have the employers. The employers are not really, to some extent, they do like students to have technical knowledge, but they do seek other competencies from the student when they leave the university. All right? Can my student think critically? Can they communicate? Can they work in teams? Can they adapt? Are they strong in digital literacy? All right? Are they creative? Are they innovative? The employers, they are not interested to train you because for them every day is money, it's fillers. They want the undergraduate to be running as soon as they come up from university. They expect the university to have them prepared for the industry. The question is, are we doing that? And then we have another challenge. We have the generation challenge. I think in my generation, I think we are Gen X. Today, I think it's called Gen Z. And you look at the Gen X and the Gen Z, and maybe people before that, the baby boomers, all right? The way we think, the way we socialize, the way we react is totally different. Our generation, we may be attached to books. We love to read books. But today, you don't see the Gen Z reading any book. Am I right? You don't see, you go to the airports, you will see the Gen X, the baby boomers, they got a novel with them, either on Kindle, or a hard copy, and they are reading this. But you don't see the Gen Z doing that. So this is another challenge for us because we have one mindset of teaching. Can this generation adapt to our mindset? Then we have issue of different high schools. All right, different high schools, depending on the high school environment, depending on the role of the peers in the high school, depending on the gender differences, depending on the study habits and so on, it decides the quality of student that enters the university. I'm very sure you can see a difference between students coming from, let's say, from international schools and local schools. So we got a variety of students coming in. As an educator, how do I balance this challenge? Right? How do I ensure that when I do my teaching, everybody is accounted for? As the Dean just mentioned rightfully, today we have another challenge. The AI is there. All right? So previously, before AI came to the picture, we used to give students projects, and their delivery was a report. Actually, that was also not a right practice. The report is just an output. We were happy to see the output, but we failed to see the process. What the students put into, how was the critical thinking taking place, how was the reasoning taking place before they reached to the output. But we were happy with the output. But today, AI came to the picture, and it exposed to us our weakness, that actually the whole process can be done by AI. Then we realized that we need to have something called the authentic assessment. Today, any report you give to a student, 95% chances that report is written by ChatGPT. Am I right? Do you disagree? No, you don't. So what are we doing about it? So these are some challenges that we have, which brings us to ponder, are these challenges a true concern for us? Who determines this? How are these challenges being addressed in education? Who is responsible to see the implementation of such changes in education? What resources and support are required? Is there a need to change the current teaching learning policy or system? Should we just add content to a 4-year program, which is already heavily loaded? I'll touch this on my last slide. And is program review accreditation sufficient? Sometimes we think we are accredited by a white man's body and we are great. No, to me, accreditation is the bare minimum quality assurance. Because why? It just measures your structural performance. It does not tell you that students are actually learning well. It just tell you you have the process in place. That's it. But are students learning well? There's a question mark. They don't tell you that. So getting any accreditation for me is just the bare minimum of any quality assurance. So let's look at STEM today. I'm again going to tie mostly on the outcome-based education. How much time do I have? 3 minutes? Okay, I've got to rush through very fast. So I'll just skip these slides here. Okay, so basically in outcome-based education, we design downwards where we have the vision and mission and we work downwards until we create the course learning outcomes. However, when we deliver there should be something called the constructive alignment. Okay? This is the heart of my talk today. So the constructive alignment basically is the alignment between the outcomes, the assessments, and the way we do the teaching and learning activities in the class. Now what happened is, in the current status, we do have OBE, but mainly it is to please the accreditators. Because most accreditation today, at least in engineering, we are based on outcome-based education. So what we do is we have the old traditional curriculum and we try to force fit OBE into our content-based curriculum. And what happened is we still maintain teacher-centered, we still do traditional teaching, but just to please on paper that we have done this A, B, C, D, E for OBE purposes. I've seen this across the last 20 years when I was a panel in Malaysia. Okay, even now when I deal with, I'm the program coordinator and so on, I've done reviews for a few universities, I still see this phenomena taking place. So what is learning? All right. So basically learning is you are trying to deliver the content, have students able to think about the content, and then move forward in terms of the meta-cognitive, which is the thinking about thinking. All right, so basically here is you're given students a scenario, they then decide based on the contents they have, based on the understanding, how should I solve this problem? How should I move on? All right, so this metacognitive is very important in education. Why? Because the next stage, it goes to self-regulated learning. In some sense, it builds you to do the lifelong learning. That means no matter where I throw you in, you are able to adapt and move forward. But unfortunately, many of us are stuck in the first two. One of the main reasons is because most courses, they work in silos. There is no communication between courses. They work in silos. I'm the instructor, I'm the expert, I know what's best for my students, I'm done. How it affects the next course, we will see. All right, we move on. So this is the reason why we are stuck in the first two. We cannot move our students into the metacognitive and to self-regulated learning. So move on to my heart of my talk today. I can go on? Okay, thank you. All right, which is constructive alignment. So as I said earlier in my first slide, we need to have a clear philosophy on why are we giving education to our students, what do we see, what do we want them to transform into. Once we have a clear understanding the philosophy, then the strategy becomes easier. Without this philosophy, the strategy is lost. All right? So once we have the philosophy, it goes into us developing our vision and mission and learning outcomes. Now again, if you see most outcome-based education programs, all right, they have the vision and mission, but it's not internalized. It's just there to fulfill some accreditation body. because the accrediting body says that you must put this on your website. But no one actually internalized this vision and mission. Once you have internalized this vision and mission, and based on your working with stakeholders, all right, then you derive what are the true learning outcomes you want for your program. This is very crucial because most programs I've come across are content-driven, content-derived. Now, what am I saying is, if you open up any course syllabus, you will see the course syllabus most of the time is based on the chapter of a textbook. Am I right? The course syllabus is based on a chapter of textbook. It's not derived based on the course learning outcomes. This is what I meant earlier just now. We're trying to force feed OBE into a traditional curriculum setup. Basically, is the course learning outcomes should derive what the content should be in the courses. That's where the transformation takes place. All right? So that's where you design your curriculum. So this brings back to constructive alignment. So once we have generated the program learning outcomes, that helps us to define the course learning outcomes, which helps us to define the course syllabus, the content that we want to deliver. So it's no more textbook based. So at times it's possible that in your course, you may refer to 2 or 3 textbooks to support your teaching and learning activities, or you yourself will write your own textbook that is aligned to your course. So you no longer define your course based on a table of content of a textbook. So once you have done or identified the intended learning outcomes, then the next step is, how should I teach each of the content that was derived based on learning outcomes to my student? Should I use problem-based learning? Should I use inquiry-based learning? Should I use experiential-based learning? Should I use case studies? All right? Should I use a flipped classroom? So what are the tools you're going to use to support that learning outcomes? Now, let me ask you a question. Have you all, I'm very sure you all have done teamwork and project, right? Project-based, projects in your classroom and so on. And I'm very sure there is assessment component of 10, 15% of teamwork. Am I right? True? Now, I'm going to make a guess here. I may be wrong. How many of you actually teach teamwork in your classroom? Can I see a show of hands? Okay, 1. Good. The others who you assess but you don't teach, that's where there is no alignment. That means you are hoping somehow they know how to work in teams. I'm going to assess you. So in a way, we are doing injustice to the student because we want them to bake a cake without showing them how to bake a cake. I'm going to mark you, this is how you bake a cake. But we don't show them how to bake a cake. So the intended learning outcomes tells you if you want a student to bake a cake, you must have the right teaching learning strategies to teach them how to bake a cake. Then comes the assessments. So you ask the student, please bake a cake. You teach them how to bake a cake. Assessments, multiple choice, A, B, C, D. Is it a true assessment? No. Because your outcomes was able to bake a cake. You taught them how to bake a cake. So your assessments should assess students' demonstration on baking a cake. If you give them a multiple choice question, it is just memory on the steps. They can score 100 over 100, doesn't mean they can bake a cake. Because they have not demonstrated to you they can bake a cake. So you need to have assessments that measures or demonstrates the students can bake a cake. That's where the constructive alignment comes in play. To give you another example, all right, I hope you can see this. So one of the examples of the outcomes of the course learning outcomes is students will be able to analyze real-world problems evaluate evidence critically, and propose innovative solution. So they have to analyze, evaluate, and propose. The Bloom's taxonomy, all right? When it comes to teaching and learning, the instructor is full-time teacher-centered. He takes 90% or she takes 90% of the time. It's just one-way delivery. Students are just passive receivers. They're not engaged in the lecture. When it comes to assessments, the instructor, he or she, end up giving an exam which is multiple choice. So do you see the misalignment here? The intended learning outcomes was to what? Analyze, evaluate, propose solutions. But the assessment is on rote learning, which is multiple choice. There's a disconnect between the assessments and the intended learning outcomes. So if you are doing outcome-based education, if this is your assessments, your student will score 100 over 100, and you say, yes, they have attained the learning outcomes in terms of to evaluate, analyze, and produce a solution. But in fact, they can't do that because they're not trained to do that. So we are assessing wrongly because there's a misalignment between the teaching courses on me. Okay, I'll go fast. So I explained this, all right? So in traditional teaching, all right, some may argue that I still have students who are doing very well, even though I'm still teacher-centered. I agree with you. These are the 10%. These numbers are just numbers, okay? The idea, the shape of the curve. These 10% usually are the highly motivated students. No matter where you put them, without you, they will still shine. All right? The Baki 80% of students, all right, they are still struggling to be independent self-learners. And the last 10%, they are highly not motivated. But when you shift to active learning, which is proven in literature, you can shift the curve where you can bring a huge number of students into what we call self-regulated learning. They become independent. All right? I'll end soon in the next two slides. So this comes to my fun slides. Okay? This is the analogy I give to my friends in engineering. Because we are doing OBE, not in the correct sense, we are just assessment oriented. Whenever new things come to us, we add content. For example, 10 years ago, there's something called sustainability. So let's add a topic on sustainability. Then comes entrepreneurship. Let's add a topic on entrepreneurship. Today is AI. Let's add a topic on AI. So we are actually adding layers after layers after layers to a program. We are actually making the program into a mummy. A time will come when the program is so rigid, it's hard to undo our mistakes. So there should be more structural reformation in transforming education where it's holistic and actually brings clear transformation just by not adding content, but overall, how can we make it more competent-based? That's where the constructive alignment comes in picture. My last slide, which I promised you to ask you, what does the 50-50 means here? Anybody? If you understood my lecture, okay, it's tied to this content. Any guess?
50 learning and 50 active learning.
No?
I'm just guessing 50% should be continuous assessment at every step of learning, and the 50% should be assessment and evaluation based on oral exams and defending what they have studied to ensure that there is no artificial intelligence integrity threat.
Good approach, but for my context, it's a bit different, but it's a good attempt. Yeah.
Seems like by using this active learning and those cognitive abilities with enhancement, there are chances you can develop your students to be confident that they go for exam, like that they will not be scared, they will be more confident, and they will be expecting what is being asked for them, and they will be more ready or more.
All right. So to summarize what you are saying, if you agree with me, this happens 50%, the blame goes to the student. 50%, we are to be blamed. Because our assessments are not right, our teaching learning is not right, there is misalignment in our curriculum. So with that, ladies and gentlemen, I thank you.